I recently was watching a video, and you might know this channel, by a guy called Serpent ZA or ZA, and I believe it ultimately stands for South Africa. I just call him Serpensa. And Serpensa's channel is all about his experiences in China. In fact, he lived there for 14 years, and he's been able to turn it into a YouTube business. So good on him. But he had a video about how he met his very first girlfriend almost instantly in China when he arrived way back in the mid-2000s. And I wouldn't say it's insightful, but it's interesting because he talks about a lot of things I've talked about and many people have talked about with regards to the nature of relative transparency as it exists in romantic relations between men and women. And his point was, the takeaway in the video, was effectively that it is just very pragmatic and almost mercantile in China. There is very little of mushy-washy love and what have you. And people, both men and women, are extremely utilitarian about the relationships they have. And in the case of the tale he told about his first girlfriend that he met within 3 days of arriving in China, he tells us that she got with him instantly, probably because she thought he had a lot of money, and at the time he did have savings. But when he ran out of money, she bolted. Long story short, he appeared on some sort of advertisement, and she picked up on it. But in that time, she'd married a new guy. But despite being married to the new guy, tried to come on to him and deceived him and tricked him and so on and so forth. Now, he cites China's horrific past, the travails and difficulties that China had been through throughout the 20th century, the Maoist revolution, etc., as the reason why people are so mercantile and utilitarian. And I don't want to completely disagree with that because the environment always mediates how people interact with each other, no matter what the environment might be, good, bad, something in between. It doesn't really matter. We are always going to respond in both conscious but also in extremely subconscious ways to environmental shifts and changes. That's nothing new. So yes, he's probably right. That's had an immense impact on the way the Chinese perceive love and the way they interact with the world, and in particular with each other. But I wouldn't ascribe it to just that. Because as I've just said, and I've talked about over the course of a decade plus, environment is everything when it comes to these matters. And you could find similar examples in the West if you go back sufficiently in time without having to cite something like the Maoist Revolution and the privations suffered under that regime by the Chinese. And this isn't just limited to China. It's very similar in Southeast Asia. It certainly is reflective of my experiences in South Korea, although not to the same degree. And there you can see how subtle differences in the environment might have an impact, because at least at the time, South Korea was still doing better than China was at the time. And overall, you can make the argument that South Korea is still doing overall better. It's a different state of affairs. And so you have a little bit more wriggle room to throw in things like romance and love and blah, blah, blah. These things that are quote-unquote cherished in the West. But they're not cherished elsewhere in the world because, depending on the circumstance, again, and I think you can't make this point often enough, the environment will dictate what people prioritize. Now, in the West, of course, we have the luxury of lovey-dovey, romance, blah, 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 BS, Valentine's Day, and that sort of thing. But you're only a major regime change or conflict away from reverting, if you want to call it that, back to a state of utilitarian love. And frankly speaking, on some level, I think it's actually better. Because what we tend to do in the West is we spend a lot of time beating around the bush, talking about ideals and what we feel and what we would like. And all the while, it's just a pretense. It's a pretense pretending to ourselves and others that we in fact want something different from these other people in another part of the world. And the veil that we've erected and woven around ourselves is really tissue thin. It's no surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise to you, that in a place like the United States and in other places in the West, guess what is the number one cause of marital problems? Finances. Money. Money is, of course, very important, extremely important. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. As someone without a lot of money, I can tell you it kind of sucks. But once you cut past all the rhetoric and the pretense and the projection, then we too in the West are facing the same issues that, say, the Chinese face. It's just that in China, you could almost call it honest love. They're not BSing each other. There's no pretense behind it. The men know what's up, the women know what's up, and nobody is wasting time talking about romance and chivalry and all the crap that we've been fed throughout our lives because, frankly speaking, they can't afford it. And we at least pretend to ourselves that we can afford it in the West, but in reality, you probably can't. Which is to say, when push comes to shove, i.e. when circumstances become dire and difficult, you can bet your bottom dollar that all the things that are quote-unquote important in China also become important in the West. Case in point, obviously, no woman in her right mind, no woman that is neurologically typical at least, is going to accept a broke bum as a partner, even if he looks really, really good in a long-term sense. She might boink him, but beyond that, not very much. All women across the world want to see men that are quote-unquote ambitious and striving for goals and so on and so forth. It's just in a place like China or Thailand or what have you, they'll just spell it out to you. They're not going to beat around the bush, which I think, quite frankly, is very refreshing. So in a sense, it's a type of honest love. They also cheat honestly. Everyone in China, according to Sripensa, as well as in other places I explored, are cheating on each other left and right if they can get away with it, because that's just what the culture sanctions. And, of course, a lot of that happens in the West too, but it's more frowned upon, it's covered up, and so on and so forth. So the people in those areas of the world, at the very least, are not BSing each other. And I think with social media in the West and the presence of YouTube and the gazillion videos about pills, people in the West kind of know what's up. Are there still normies out there who think that love is real and that romance is real and you just need to be a good person to be able to land a relationship and secure a relationship and maintain it? Yeah, those people probably still exist. But I think that number is dwindling. Most people are aware that women across the world, they're pretty much identical. I remember way back in the day, something you probably heard a million times, people talking about Chinese women and Colombian women and Brazilian women and American women and German women, as if they were all highly distinct from each other, when the evolutionary pressures that have shaped modern women are universal across the globe. You will not find distinctions unless they are atypical, neurologically speaking. The problem, I think, in the West is that over time we've conditioned ourselves in a way such that many people who dwell in the West, who've grown up in the West, I'm speaking, of course, of Europe and North America, have not only convinced themselves and allowed themselves to be convinced, but really need the kind of fantastical padding that often accompanies relationships. So they need to believe in things like love, and they need to believe in things like romance, and they need to believe in the power of feelings, right? Because without these things, they don't think relationships could be viable. Because who honestly wants to engage in a relationship, particularly in the West, where they're just pressing a bunch of buttons? Okay, how much money do you have, man? Oh, okay, you have enough money. Okay. Woman responds, I will boink you 3 times a week, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm leaving out all the black pill stuff about lookism, because lookism, historically speaking, obviously has always existed, but it was really a luxury, and we see now this luxury in the West obviously coming to the fore. But even in that regard, the mainstream, normie types, have not really come to terms with notions of lookism. They'll still talk about things like not judging a book by its cover, all the pretentious, stupid fairy tales that we've grown up with that continue to have currency, at least amongst normies. And I think that for whatever reason in the West, whether it comes to looks or the ultimate utilitarian aspect of relationships, which is the predominant model throughout the rest of the world, that whether it's been by conditioning or some other factor, genetic, cultural, who knows, people in the West really need their fantastical fairy tale padding to want to engage in relationships, because that mercantile exchange is not sufficient. Likewise, most people would be horrified if you just spelt it out loud that the reason why they're having a relationship is because the person is hot, right? But even then, in that case, if you're only going on the hotness of an individual, that too is a very difficult prospect to sell, because it's very difficult to have a long-term relationship simply based on pure lookism. And despite what a lot of black pill individuals might say, that's absolutely true. If the only thing you find interesting is boinking the person, what do you do on the downtime? What are you going to do when you decide to have children, et cetera, et cetera? Final point I want to make about these young guys who are hyper obsessed with lookism and getting a girl and a girlfriend, what have you. I want these guys to realize that no matter what they do, they're always just a pin drop away from everything falling apart. You will not find a stable relationship in the West unless you meet a unicorn or you encounter a near miracle. Every relationship you engage in the West, especially if you're Generation Z or a young millennial, given the exigencies and pressures of the time, is really just a hair's breadth away from falling apart, as you all know, because women have tons and tons of options. So unless you're the best, which you probably aren't, you eventually will lose. So you can fight the good fight, you can look smacks, you can do whatever you want, but don't think for a second that you are going to be able to keep her, right? As they say, she's not yours, it's just your turn. At least in other places in the world, they don't pretend that it's anything other than that, which, to my mind, is a little bit relieving. Maybe it's not real love, but at least it's honest love. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please hit that bell icon, because for some reason I'm getting fewer and fewer views than I have in many years, and it's very interesting and I'm trying to figure out why that's the case. So hit that bell icon to get notified of my videos. Subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber. Leave a comment, share the video, all that wondrous YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. Take care. May the gods watch over you. Enjoy your forthcoming weekend. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.